I discovered that I was to be provided for the rest of my life, and that I had made a mortal enemy all in the span of minutes. My uncle's announcement had brought such joy and relief to both Mrs. Hastings and myself that all we had been able to repeat was, "Oh, sir," and "Oh, uncle," again and again. But with the sudden and angry departure of my cousin, we quickly fell silent and stared after him, not knowing what to do. "Don't worry about Charles," said Uncle Geoffrey. "He will have quite enough money to sustain himself for the rest of his life, even if he doesn't deserve it. But I will rest easier knowing that the two of you are also provided for." "You are most generous and kind," insisted Mrs. Hastings, and I said also that this was far more than I ever expected of him. But Uncle just clapped his hands and said we would talk no more about it. He would like another piece of Mrs. Hastings' cake, and then he should like nothing so much as for the three of us to walk down to the shore again and sit a while, for autumn was coming soon, and there would not be many of these warm evenings left. And so the three of us set out, and enjoyed the ocean breeze playing on our faces as we watched the waves swell and break. A group of young men came by, one of them Zeke, riding their unicycles on the boardwalk, and when Zeke saw me, he went through a wondrous performance of turns and spins, backing up and pivoting so that we began to applaud. At that, the other 5 men came back, and they rode in a line in front of us, as if on stage. My uncle laughed so that it was worth the walk down from the house just to see him enjoying himself. "Zeke Carey, you watch out or a circus will have you," Mrs. Hastings cried. "You're better with that unicycle than you are with your father's horse and wagon, I'll wager." "Now, Mrs. Hastings, no one has complained yet about my service," Zeke told her. "And if you make a complaint, I swear I will run off to the circus and take Judith with me." At that, Uncle Geoffrey and Mrs. Hastings laughed again. I liked hearing Zeke talk so in front of the other lads. All the same, my cheeks blushed, but Zeke threw me a kiss as he pedaled away. I remember the first time we had gone to the cove, and the way his lips had kissed mine as we folded the blanket. The following day, Uncle Geoffrey packed his valise as I prepared to set out for Helene's hat shop. Charles did not come back for breakfast that morning. In fact, I wondered if we should see him ever again. He was so angry when he left the table the previous night. The sky did not please me as I made my way towards town. The clouds had an unfriendly look, reminding me of the day I had first come to Whispers. But I told myself that the weather cannot always be fair, in Ohio as well as the Carolinas, and so I cheerfully worked in the hat shop, putting in a new display of full bonnets in the window for ladies to admire. At lunchtime, I traded secrets with Violet. When I told her about Zeke saying that he would run off with me to the circus, she said, "Mrs. Hastings had better watch out that he doesn't run off with you to marry, for I've seen the fond way he looks at you when he's waiting outside in the wagon." "Oh, that's nonsense," I told her, but in my heart, I knew that it was true. When I arrived home that afternoon, Uncle Geoffrey had gone, and Mrs. Hastings was hard at work in the root cellar, making room for the potatoes, onions, and turnips we would store when the weather grew colder. I did not mind work in the root cellar, for it was the coldest place to be on a warm day, and I liked the dank smell of earth, liked walking about on the straw and counting the apples and potatoes still left in the bins. Mrs. Hastings had started up the short flight of stairs to the kitchen above with an apron full of potatoes, and I was close behind her, when suddenly she gave a scream and dropped her apron. Potatoes rained down on me, and I put out my arms just in case she would fall. "Mrs. Hastings, what is it?" I cried, stumbling up the steps beside her. But the poor woman could not speak. Her face was as white as milk. She grabbed hold of my arm and screamed again, pointing, and there, coming across the kitchen floor, was the ghostly hand, dragging its half-severed finger like a tail. I reached forward and gripped the door handle and pulled the door shut with a bang, which was useless, of course, for the hand could easily have flattened itself on its palm and edged under. But I knew not else what to do to calm Mrs. Hastings, afraid her heart might give way. I helped her down the steps and onto the old cobbler's bench, where we often sat as we sorted the apples. Her eyes were as large as coat buttons, however, and words wouldn't come. She only clutched at my arm, trembling. Finally, she said, "It's her. It's her, then. The ghost of Jade Green." "You've seen it before? The hand?" I asked. "Mercy, no, child. But what else could it be? Oh, after her death, we heard such shrieks and moans from that room where she died. It was enough to break one's heart and chill the bones, I tell you. But once we rid the house of all that she held dear, the sounds came no more, and we were sure we were rid of her." Then there came the scurrying, scratching sound from the door of the root cellar, and again Mrs. Hastings gave a cry and cowered against the wall, her hands over her face. In the flickering glow of the candle, I watched for the first sign of those thin white fingers working themselves through the crack under the door, but they did not appear. Instead, it sounded as though the hand were climbing up the wall of the door frame, and then a noise that stopped my breath. The metallic click of the bolt blocking the door from the outside.